Hey everybody, and welcome to HoloLens, a world where anything is possible. This is part 2 of the presentation. In this part of the demonstration, I'm going to be taking you through how you can get started with HoloLens development. And no, you don't need a HoloLens to be able to do this. What I'll be going through is how I put together the demonstration shown in part 1 of the presentation, where I'm throwing balls at cubes on the SSW table. And if you haven't seen part 1 of my presentation, I strongly recommend you go back and have a look at that now. It's not to be missed. So what we're going to go through in this part of the presentation, we're going to have a look at Unity, where the 3D objects are made. We're going to have a look at Visual Studio classes to control those objects and the speech handling. And we're also going to have a look at the HoloLens emulator, which is really important if you don't have a HoloLens. It allows you to do the HoloLens development and see how your development is going to look on the actual device. The screen that we have here is the Unity IDE. And what I'm going to take you through here is not a full introduction into Unity, but show you some really key points that you need to understand to get started with HoloLens development. The first point here is the main camera, and for HoloLens development, we need to make sure our transform position X, Y, and Z are set to 0 and not the defaults that Unity provides. And the reason for this is that our camera position needs to be right at the head position that the user is. Anything other than that for HoloLens development is just not going to work. The next part you need to be aware of is our clear flags for the camera. We need to have this set to a solid color with a background of black. And the reason for this is that HoloLens doesn't render anything that is black. And so anything that is black will be completely see-through to the user. The next part we need to set is our clipping planes. We need a near clipping plane of 50 centimeters. And what that does is it won't render anything that is closer than 50 centimeters to the user's eyes. And the reason why we don't want to render anything closer than that is because the user will go cross-eyed and they'll get a headache very quickly. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to set a far clipping plane of 10 meters. You can actually set that to an infinite distance, although I'm not sure what the purpose of that is. Unless you have massive objects in the distance, you're not going to be able to see it. Now we'll have a look at our project settings. So under the Edit, Project Settings and Player, in other settings here, you need to make sure that virtual reality supported is ticked and that we've got our Windows holographic SDK included for this project. And scrolling down under our publishing settings, and our capabilities, we need the internet client checked here. That's so that we can deploy projects over Wi-Fi directly to the HoloLens device. We need our microphone capability checked because the HoloLens has inbuilt speech recognition, and so we need the microphone to pick up speech and use that capability. And finally, we need spatial perception checked here, and that's to do all of our spatial mapping and have that capability enabled. So taking a look at the scene here, I have a plane object which the cubes are sitting on, and to show the SSW logo, all I've done is to drag a JPEG and drop that directly onto the plane, and it wraps the plane in the logo for us. And have a look at the cubes. They're created through Create 3D Object and Cube, and then you can size them up to whatever size you like. And similar to the plane object, to get the pictures on there, I've just dragged a JPEG image and dropped that onto the cube, and that renders nicely for us. The final object that we'll look at here is our ball object, SSW ball. So you recall from the demonstration I was throwing balls at the cubes and knocking the cubes off of the plane there. This is a 3D sphere, just created through create 3D object and sphere, and setting the size on it. Similarly, it's got the logo on. I dragged and dropped the JPEG of the SSW logo onto the sphere, and that wraps it nicely for us. I've got a couple of scripts in the scripts folder here, and with these you can double click on them and that takes us into Visual Studio 2015. You can see the first one we've got here is the SSW ball behaviour class, and from in here I've got a gesture recogniser to recognise the gestures that we use with HoloLens, so like the bloom gesture and the air tap gesture. I'm setting a float variable for force magnitude of 300 newtons, and that's going to be the force that the ball is thrown at the cubes at. And then we've got a material object here for wrapping the ball. In our start method here, this is where we handle the initialization. We've got our gesture recogniser, we're setting a new instance of that. And we're adding a method to our tapped event, so that's to handle the air tap. Setting recognisable gestures to a tap gesture, an air tap gesture, and then we start capturing those gestures. When the HoloLens recognises an air tap gesture, we're calling the shoot method here. Then from within the shoot method, we're creating a sphere object for our SSW ball. We're setting a size for that sphere, and then we're rendering that with our SSW ball material. And we're giving the ball a rigid body, and a rigid body is a physics object in Unity. Setting a mass for that ball, and then setting the position of that rigid body to transform position. The transform position is where the user is actually looking, or the gaze position of the HoloLens. Then we call rigid body add force, and passing in transform forward, which is where the user is looking, times the force magnitude. And so what that's going to do is to shoot the ball with a force of where the user is gazing times the force magnitude that was set at the beginning of the class. Our update method here, I'm not actually doing anything there, but update gets called for every time that the HoloLens refreshes, and it refreshes at a rate of 60 times a second. So you can do quite a bit of processing within the update method. And finally, within this class, we have some tidy ups. We're jumping now to the speech handler. And here I've got a game object called plane, which is for the plane with the SSW logo that the cubes were sitting on in the demonstration. We're setting a string called reset scene command, and that's just to reset scene, as you can see here. The great thing about HoloLens development and development in Unity here is that previously we would have to write all of our own speech recognition and speech handling methods and classes. But within the HoloLens development, all we need to do is to set a string, and it's clever enough to understand when we speak that string and be able to handle that in whatever fashion we program, and I'll show you what that does in a moment. We've got a keyword recogniser here, and then our start method for initializing. We're setting a new instance of the keyword recogniser and passing on an array of those commands that we want it to recognise. Then setting up an event handler for on-phrase recognised, and then we start the keyword recogniser. Jumping into the method that handles the on-phrase recognised event, you can see here we've got if command equals reset scene command. So if it understands that I've said reset scene, then it's going to reset the scene, as you can see here through the scene manager object, or reload the screen if you like, the scene if you like. And finally we have some tidy up. I'm going to jump back into Unity now. We're ready to build the project. And we need to set some build settings. And first of all, we need to make sure that your scene is included in the build. And the platform that we're targeting here is Windows Store with the SDK of Universal 10 or UWP. And we're setting the UWP build type to Direct 3D. And we're going to build and run that on our local machine. So hit the build button and we set the folder that we want to build to. And off it goes. Now what that's going to do is going to build a solution for us in Visual Studio. And when that's done, it'll pop up with an Explorer window. We'll go in and double click the solution. That'll open up in Visual Studio. And I'll take you through then how we can deploy that to the HoloLens emulator and demonstrate the balls and the cubes. You can see here we've got our project folder and the solution. Double click on that and we'll open it up in Visual Studio 2015. And while that's loading, a couple of things that we need to be aware of. Our solution configurations, we need to set this to release. And we need to target the x86 platform because the processor in the HoloLens is a 32-bit processor. And we deploy to our HoloLens emulator. But if we wanted to deploy to the HoloLens device itself, we could pick remote machine here and input the IP address. And if we've got the HoloLens paired with our PC, there'll be a PIN number that you enter to go through the deployment process. It's quite quick. For this purpose, we're going to show you the HoloLens emulator. And click on debug, start without debugging, and off we go. Now this is one that I prepared earlier, so this will refresh, but this is the HoloLens emulator, and you see it's got a small view portal which accurately represents the view portal on the HoloLens device itself. And this is a virtual machine that runs on our PC. So you can interact with the emulator by clicking the left mouse button and moving the mouse around. You see that moves. Clicking the right button does an air tap, and the W key moves in, S moves out, same as gameplay, and AD moves left and right. And you can hold down the Shift key and accelerate those movements as well. So here we have the project deploying. So you can see it's made with Unity, and you can get a personal edition of Unity at no cost and do your own development with that. So let's zoom out and scroll around. So as you can see there, we've got our plane down the bottom with the SSW logo. Then we've got our cubes up here, a few faces that you might recognise there. Now we're going to shoot some of the balls at it. So there you go. Scroll down a bit. You can see the balls falling off, and this works in exactly the same way as the HoloLens device itself. The only thing that you really don't get with the emulator is the spatial mapping, so it's not aware of your surroundings, but other than that you can do prototyping and learn a lot of development using the emulator. So what you're going to need to get started with the HoloLens development, you'll need Visual Studio 2015 Update 3. You need the HoloLens emulator itself, and you're going to need the Unity 3D technical preview for HoloLens as well. I strongly recommend that you go and have a look at hololens.com, which is Microsoft's HoloLens site. They've got a massive information on there, including the HoloLens Academy, which takes you through step-by-step tutorials on HoloLens development. Great way to get started. There's also a developer community on hololens.com with some excellent resources. There are also a number of applications, the Galaxy application that Microsoft has published on the Windows Store, which is available as open source, so you can get into quite a complex application and see how that's put together. Similarly, the Unity website has a number of tutorials available for free, so I strongly recommend that you go into those and do some of their tutorials too. And thanks very much for watching my presentation today. HoloLens is a magnificent technology, something that I'm very excited about. It's going to be a game changer for us, and I think that in 5 years' time we're going to see these devices mainstream. So now the time is ripe to get on board with development and learning about this wonderful technology. I invite you to join the conversation with the hashtag of HoloLens on Twitter and my Twitter handle, Stavros the Geek. Thank you very much, everybody.